You don't just
Yeah.
experience the world in primarily language arts or primarily social studies or primarily
Yeah.
science. Like
Right.
everything's kind of interdisciplinary, right? So you're
Mhm.
just trying to communicate that via the project. And that's,
Yeah.
it's kind of the point. You're trying to prepare them for real life.
Yeah.
And there is that variation of what I think a lot of schools say is that they want to create lifelong learners in their kids. And that's what we're trying to cultivate, right? So
Right.
it's
Right.
just really interesting.
You are listening to The Learning Curve with Miss Taleen. This is a space where you can feel empowered to think about education differently.
Hey, in this episode, you'll be hearing me talk with my dear friend and wonderful educator, Kendra Scanlon. We dive deep into what project based learning is and how that's really beneficial for a lot of kids and what that means. And at the end, we kind of touch on how we think maybe all these new technologies with artificial intelligence may take a part in project based learning and education in general. So I hope you enjoy listening to this one as much as I enjoyed recording it. Have a good day and enjoy listening to The Learning Curve.
Okay. Hey, hi everyone. My name is Kendra Etter, and so I got into education. Well, gosh, it's been 10 years now. Wow, that's crazy to think about. But even prior to that, I had a lot of experience working at camps and working with kids. So I wanted to be a teacher. I remember from a young age, not like from some people remember from when they were in kindergarten and they used to teach their little dolls, but I remember from about fourth or fifth grade. And I remember I asked my mom to buy me or to get me this set that had like a chalkboard. And that's my first distinct memory of when I wanted to get or wanted to be in education.
Yeah.
Fast forward some years, and I was going into college right around the time when there was major teacher layoffs. So I had planned to go into teaching, but my mom was like, you may want to consider a different major. Like it does not look for like a good time. And on top of that, right, we all know teachers don't make a lot.
Yeah,
It
that
is
was
a
sound advice during that
yeah,
time too.
yeah. My mom, and she advised me to be a speech therapist. Not a bad,
And that's
not a
what your
bad
sister
idea.
does,
That's what
right?
my sister does. But of
Yeah.
course, I was like, well, I don't want to do what my what my sister does. But
Yeah.
speech therapy is a pretty secure place, and yeah, they seem to.
Yeah, because you can work through hospitals or schools,
Yeah, yeah.
or have a private
Uh,
practice.
yeah, so obviously not mad that I did, but it's so funny that was her advice because it was really looked like a really poor time to be going into education. So in college I was starting to look at other things. Like I think I started out as an international something international studies or something, and I was
Mhm.
learning Spanish. And I just remember I heard this girl down the hallway in my dorm that I was living in say, do you guys think I'd make a good like little kid teacher? Which I thought the wording was funny, but I was like, really kept thinking about like, yeah, I still think I want to be a teacher. I'm not really that interested in this that I'm pursuing, right?
Yeah.
It was coming to me that no, that is still what I want to do. And who knows what the future holds, right? At that time it wasn't great. So I went down the hall and I was like, yeah, like I want to. I think you'd be great at it. We both went and changed our majors the next day. And because I think that's what I always wanted to do.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I always, and we still talk today. I'm like, hey, how's teaching going? She actually teaches at a bilingual school, which is really
Oh,
cool.
so she kind of married the two.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
cool.
she did. Well, I think her major was like physical therapy, and she was like, "This is way too much,
Yeah.
technical and science and stuff." So, but yeah, we were both taking Spanish. So yeah, she married the two. Um, so then from there, I finished out my degree, got my teaching credential, and then so jobs were beginning to pick up again around the time when I started. There was starting to be more of a need, not like how it is now where we're in a teacher shortage now, but it was starting to look better. People weren't all having to, I know a lot of people around probably when you started too, Taleen, right? 2008,
It was really
2009.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah,
When
like
my first
yeah.
year was in 2009, and that was really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think so when I started teaching in 2013, it was getting better.
Yeah.
And that's where my first year was teaching at iLead, where Taleen and I met
Where we met.
and had
The
our first
genesis of your
year.
career.
Yeah, had our first year together. It wasn't her first year teaching, but it was my first year. And I have so many fond memories from that year, even though it was so tough.
That was a tough year.
Yeah, really, really tough year. So, and then so I taught a fourth, fifth combo, and then from there, pretty much stayed within fourth and fifth in all of my teaching that I've done. So I taught at the charter school for 4 years, and then I actually went to a district school and still stayed, or went to a combo again, but still stayed in that fourth, fifth. And then now I am supporting and working with charter schools. I am one of our programs is teaching some online, but primarily what I do is helping with curriculum, instruction, like a strong advocate for project-based learning. Taleen and I both are, and not just worksheets and sitting in your seat and getting information. So
Right.
trying to get that going as much as possible in the schools that I work with and support. I know Taleen is as well.
Yeah.
And so that's my role now, and has been for, well, a year and a half now.
Yeah.
So so which has been nice. It's been a nice transition as a parent into that. I do miss pieces, I would say, of the classroom, but not
The pros
everything.
outweigh the cons.
The
I think
pros
at this
outweigh the
point.
cons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially being a
So-
new mom right now. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
just had your baby almost exactly a year ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Oh
you
yeah.
know,
And I think it's a really tough for moms who are balancing, because I don't know, I know when we were both, like, you put your heart into those kids in your class too. So then to come home
Yeah.
and put your, I think there's tough. And I think a lot of people do, either they'll do like maybe become like doing something with homeschool facilitator, or, because I think it's tough to be in the classroom while also having, especially like young kids.
Yeah, I remember thinking, like, because I've always wanted to be a teacher too, and I remember thinking, and I've always wanted to be a mom. And I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
thinking that being a teacher is like the perfect job because my schedule would mimic
Yeah.
my kids' schedule,
Yeah.
and I could still spend time with them. And then getting into the career in real life was like, well, no, you're working all of the time. Like all of the time, you go into
Yeah.
work and then you prep for the next day and your lesson planning and your grading and your,
Yeah.
and then at a project-based school,
Yeah.
it was all encompassing
Yeah.
because we had to look at the standards and backwards plan and make
Mhm.
these like meaningful teaching experiences for these kids, but we didn't have like a traditional curriculum to follow. We were just
Yeah.
creating our own things. And there was beauty in that we were able to be like creative and to
Mhm.
bring pieces of ourself into it and our passion into it, but it was a lot of work. It
Mhm.
was a lot of work
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and a
And that's so
lot of
funny.
compiling.
I remember too seeing a teacher like over the summer with her kids at the pool, and I'm like, oh, it's the perfect job. Like, you get the summer off
Yeah,
with your
yeah.
kids, but we all know that that is a lie. Teachers don't
That
really
is a lie.
get their summers off, right? It's all spent prepping and preparing for your next year. And yeah, right. Like, a project base is amazing, but it is a for teachers, facilitators, it's a lot more work and prep. Like, you're coming up with pretty much, you're not following a curriculum, and you're coming up with, you're backwards planning, you're coming up with your own ideas. You want it to be engaging, you want it to keep their interest. So it's a lot more planning
It
on your
is.
end and time. And
Now, because we're familiar with what project-based learning is, can you explain what it is to the masses or parents who are maybe interested in doing something like that with
oh
their kids, or other educators who might want to delve into something like that?
yeah,
What do
I
you
forget sometimes, I throw around language, or we do as educators, and forget that, like, there's other people who might not know what what we're
forget too?
talking
I have to
about.
remember it. So this formatting helps because I'm like,
Oh
they
yeah.
might not know what that means.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So project-based learning, in my how I would define it, is where children are asked to solve a problem through a driving question. So there's a question that is going to drive their learning. And it's usually relevant to them. Like, there's a call to action, there's something that they are trying to achieve through it. So instead of like, if we think of a traditional unit, maybe we've learned about in school, like this is kind of the typical one that we use. But if we think about studying in California history, studying the missions, right? You do a mission report, you go to the mission, you type up this whole report. But the base of the project is really done at home. You're not really doing a whole lot
with
in
pre-made
school.
kits and stuff like that a lot
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
time
You
too.
buy a kit, you put it together.
Yeah.
There's not an inquiry level to it. So an inquiry level would be they have to apply this something that they're learning about and put it into action. So maybe you're asking, I know one we did, which I still don't think is a great project example, but was they had to design the 21st California mission. So they're being asked to do something or to pretend they were living in that time. So we did a gold rush project too. So they were
Yes,
asked
talk
to,
about that one.
oh yeah.
Yes, I
So
like that
they
one.
were asked to showcase for others what it would be like living during the gold rush. And so kids actually came out, so they're dressed up and they took on someone from the gold rush and they wrote about their life as that person. But it wasn't somebody who actually existed. They made up their own characters. And then they had it was a whole there were shops and it was
Like
a
a boom
whole
town.
a whole
Yeah.
boom town, and kids could
Yeah.
actually come and so they were teaching others. They could pan for gold. They were selling baked goods. So there was actually, looking back now, there was entrepreneurialism. There was they were asked to talk to others about what they had learned, and then put an experience for others. So not only were these kids at the school and parents learning about the gold rush, they actually took on this role and had to, I mean, I think about it now, I'm like, it actually involved many different things because they went into the makery to build their boom town. They wrote their narrative about their character. They maybe baked something or created something to sell. So there was all these different components, right? It wasn't just, okay, we're going to learn about the gold rush. You're going to write up a report and then you're going to tell others about it. And maybe you'll make a little model, right?
Right. No, it was all encompassing.
Yeah, it's all, so it's, you're covering all subjects. And yeah, you're trying to accomplish something, whether it's to make others understand what life was like for some people during the gold rush, to see maybe some things were positive and some things were negative, or whether it is to design a town where they have to use renewable energy sources, and because in this town they can use wind or sunlight, and so they're actually solving a problem. And some people are really good at, I don't know if I was ever quite an expert, but going to locals and seeing what problems are in their community and then designing a project around that. So kids feel more invested, right, if they're feel like they're making a difference and doing something that's relevant.
Right, because they're
yeah.
so involved in it, and they're
Mhm.
so that is their schooling, that is their
Yeah.
reading, their researching, their
Yeah.
writing, they're doing math, especially if they're
Yeah.
cooking or if they're selling something or they're having to calculate.
Mhm.
Some of them even made costumes, and if they wanted
Oh
to
yeah.
get crazy with measurements and
Mhm.
sewing and stuff, they could do things like that too.
Yeah.
You mentioned the makery, which is our version of
Yeah.
like a wood shop,
Yeah. So they
and
built their storefronts, which
they
is math.
literally
I
built
mean,
it.
yeah, woodworking, learning how to measure,
Mhm.
and I mean, these are practical life skills that they can use in the future,
Right, and we
or
joke
today. Yeah.
yeah, and we joke that it's not like a Googleable question
Oh
as your
yeah,
driving
that's
question.
right.
You have to make it something much more vague and
Mhm.
broad that they are working towards
Yeah.
using that
Yeah.
inquiry-based learning,
Yeah,
to
and it's a
solve
hard
stuff.
shift. I was talking actually with another colleague today who was saying, yeah, it was, it's hard to explain to someone like, yeah, sometimes you will have project time, but your project is also can be your whole entire, it's all your subjects. It's what's driving everything, which can be hard to work it all in, especially with math is always a challenge. But I think too, especially parents that are interested in it, other educators, it doesn't have to be this. I know we said it can be challenging, but when you're in it, it's so exciting and so engaging, and it can cover everything,
Yeah.
in this one project, we were doing all subjects, and it's you're reading, you're researching, you're writing, you're measuring, right? So it and especially if there's parents who homeschool, right, your kids' interests can really drive it. You can really individualize in a class too, but
Yeah.
you might not always have 25 kids that are interested,
Right. And
but
you're,
they can pick different like elements that interest them, right? And
yeah.
how they showcase their learning sometimes too. So
Yeah. And sometimes kids don't know everything that they're interested in
yeah,
yet until they're
yeah,
exposed to it. So I think that's a big part of it too. So,
yeah, that's a good
maybe
point.
you're not the biggest fan of the gold rush, but whatever, like you can still go through it. And, I would say that, it at least provided you the opportunity to get your hands a little dirty. And
Yeah,
as the person who's running something like that, you kind of have to abandon a little bit of what you remember as your own education sometimes if you came up from a traditional system. Like I know I did.
yeah,
I was at a desk, I had to be quiet, I filled out tons of paperwork all day long, and I had
yeah,
to
yeah,
memorize and regurgitate for a test, and this was
yeah,
something I did. To be on the other side of it and go, okay, this is project-based learning, and I'm learning how to
yeah.
build this plane while I'm flying it. And and that was so interesting to experience, and I'm grateful for that experience because it really exercised my brain, but it really was having to abandon a lot of my preconceived notions about what a classroom should look like,
Yeah.
and then embrace what that could be if done
Yeah.
properly. But it's a lot of work when you do it properly. So
Yeah, yeah.
and it can be
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and I didn't come from like a super traditional where it was, where we test and test and test, but I did come from a school where I would say we did projects, but it wasn't project-based learning, right? So we did the missions project and we did like a state project in 5th grade. But I tell everyone this story, right? I was so upset because I was doing mine on Texas and we had to build a replica of something that was important in Texas. And so I was building the Alamo. Well, my mom, we were working on it at home. So my mom's like, you're not doing it right. It was this whole thing. And I wake up and the Alamo's built. So still in my family to this day, when we see each other, like, remember the Alamo? Because I was so mad that I didn't do my project. Right. So not project-based learning.
That's so funny.
Yeah, we do remember the Alamo. I was so mad. But it
That's
is a
so
big
funny.
difference, right? Because
Yeah.
it wasn't there wasn't something I was trying to solve. It was just I'm going to do a report on Texas, and I need and that's what I don't remember these other than this argument with my mom, which shouldn't be my fond learning memory, right? So like that I had to move away
Much
from.
love to you, Mrs. Scanlon, if you're
Yeah,
listening to this.
yeah, yeah. Love you, mom. Thanks for
But we
doing it
remember
though,
the
because
Alamo.
yeah, yeah, I wasn't doing it right. I know, but that was my shift. Like I had to shift away from a report style, or
Yes.
not that you can't do stuff at home, but I really tried to get my kids my students not to be doing too much at home because I have these memories of, well, it doesn't turn into
Authentic work.
your
Yeah.
authentic work. And it's not, there's a certain ownership that comes with the kids doing their projects and understanding what they're being asked to do. And that's more important than them just showing up with this beautifully built Alamo or whatever it might be, right? So that was a shift for me that I really had to kind of wrap my head around, because my only experience had been projects in that form, not where there was a question and there was these different elements tied in and there was something to be solved. So it takes a while, and you have to kind of, even so if you're like facilitator or a teacher new to it too, like I would say we both learned a lot in our first one we ever did, where we're like, yeah, maybe we wouldn't do all those components, or wouldn't,
Yeah.
like you have to, even as an adult, get your hands dirty in it a little bit, or get your feet in it and experiment, or you'll never
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
realize.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing that you just said in your parent story, or the story with your mom, I know so many parents that would do exactly that, like exactly the same thing. I know my mom would have probably done that too,
Okay.
and just trying to help and make sure things were done on time.
Yeah.
And and as a teacher, I had to fight that as well. Like I had to be like, when there were kids that were just not doing what they were supposed to be doing, And then at the end of the project, there's something that we call a presentation of learning. And then they show what they've done. And you invite the parents and other classes to come and look at what it is. And the presentation can look different ways. But I'm remembering one of these, we call them POLs, presentations of learning, at the end, like it's the culminating event. And I remember one of my kids had nothing done. And despite my reminding him, reminding his parent, whatever, we had to let him kind of fail. We had to let him just show that he had nearly nothing at that time. And that was a really hard thing. Like, that was a really hard lesson that I had to sit back and watch, because I was like, no, I don't want him to fail. I want him to succeed. But they had to learn that, like, really hard lesson,
Oh, same. And that was probably one of my hardest, or my biggest challenges as an educator too, was like, I don't want to see the kids show up to this presentation of learning not ready, or like, and I think like we want it to look a certain way too, right? So I felt the same way about that. But I think too, right, when we think about what we want kids to learn, which maybe that's a whole nother topic, but in schooling, it's not necessarily about the gold rush or studying Texas or whatever it is, but we want them to learn some skills. And probably these kids that after their first time, maybe not all of them, but some of them, after their first time showing up with nothing, they learned about, maybe I should manage my time, or maybe I should finish my work, or these skills that can carry them further than just the information.
These logical consequences that come along with the decisions you make. And a lot of the time it does, because it's kind of embarrassing whenever, because I kept trying to remind him, like, other people are going to come and look and see what you've been learning and doing. And sometimes they really just don't care. And there's that. Yeah. But a lot of the time, most of the time, I would say that the kids are invested, more invested, dare I say, than they would be in a worksheet or in a textbook. Not that those things are terrible. I just mean that they shouldn't be the end all be all of education. That's my only point. So I like the in fact, I found textbooks to be helpful to provide the information that I wanted to cover, and I used it kind of as like a guiding line as far as like what I wanted. I'm like, okay, so if we're going to be studying the American Revolution, we're going to need to hit this point, this point, this point, and this point. How can we take that and make it more hands-on, engaging, inquiry-based, etc. Right? So interesting. Yeah.
And it can be hard to find like articles and stuff. So sometimes the textbook can help with having like a reading that's at their, so right,
because reading the different types of text too is an important skill, because I'll notice sometimes that one of the shortcomings I do see in project-based learning is the math component or something. And so oftentimes we have to supplement like a typical math curriculum alongside the project-based things, but we do try to incorporate some sort of math into it so that you can see this is kind of more how real life works. You don't just experience the world in primarily language arts or primarily social studies or primarily science. Like everything's kind of interdisciplinary, right? So you're just trying to communicate that via the project, and that's it's kind of the point. You're trying to prepare them for real life. And there is that variation of what I think a lot of schools say is that they want to create lifelong learners in their kids, and that's what we're trying to cultivate, right? So it's just really interesting. But what was interesting too, so I taught with you 4th and 5th grade at iLead, and that next year I moved down to kindergarten. So the way that projects look in different grades is also super interesting, because we're talking about the kids that we have to let go a little bit and let them fail a little bit, but it's not necessarily ability based or anything like that. It was more of a motivation type of thing that we were trying to get them going and moving with them. But if they physically could not do something, or they had like a disability of some sort that was preventing them from being able to finish a task, then we would scaffold it somehow. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how do you accommodate like younger kids in a project-based setting, or kids with who need more accommodations and stuff like that?
Right. That thinking about that's quite a shift. That was quite a shift you made. So I imagine, like, because I I mean, I've worked with kindergarten facilitators, but to think about, I can't just be like, well, you'll figure it out, right? In kindergarten, it's a little different with the older
You're
kids.
5, you've got this.
Yeah, you've got it.
So-
Yeah. So I think there is actually a lot of in project-based learning that allows for differentiation. And like if a kid really struggles with writing, I think that a lot of those kids actually find a lot of success because many of them can present in different ways.
Yeah.
Or even if a kid is struggles to present, they could record themselves on video, right? I think we both saw kids who definitely wouldn't have maybe been as successful in a traditional environment if they were forced to do it just in this one way, came out of their box. They found ways that they really enjoyed showcasing. When we Taleen and I had done this project with comics and the periodic table. And I remember I had a kid who up until that point hadn't really put a lot of efforts into anything that we had done in project, and then just put together this beautiful comic book because was very artistically gifted. And so things like that. And then also like kids can use, I know that we've both done where they can instead of maybe writing, they can dictate if they have a big struggle there. So yeah, definitely not just saying whatever, all of you will figure it out. There is so many ways that you can adapt and change the project. And again, going back to that, how they present too, right? Oftentimes there's options, and do you want to showcase, maybe you want to make a video if you're doing something that suits these lines, or maybe you want to just speak, maybe you want to write a song, right? There's always different ways that they can present, and I just think it opens it up to kids who have, maybe they're gifted in other ways that they don't fit this like traditional, oh well, I'm just good at this, and they find that at a young age sometimes in project-based learning, and like you said, they realize, oh, I actually am really into this. I didn't know I was. So I think that's a big difference, is that there's always steps along the way to help them be successful, right? We would always support them in whatever way we can, so that by the end of this project they have felt success, right? Because we always want our kids to feel like they've accomplished and learned and had success. But sometimes after several different things, if it still doesn't happen, it still doesn't happen. But there are just so many adaptations, and I think in kindergarten, right, there's a lot with where you support them with helping them write, or helping they dictate their thoughts, or maybe it looks a little different, they're creating a book and they get to draw or paste, or and maybe they're observing something happening and they keep a little scientific journal along the way, and that's what they're showcasing, right? So it can look so many different ways, depending on the age, depending on their ability, depending on where they're at with their and reading too, right? We can get audible that can read to them if they're a struggling reader, so that they're still obtaining information, or videos, right? I learn a lot on YouTube videos.
Yeah, I still learn a lot on YouTube videos.
No,
it's kind of no excuse to not know anything anymore, because YouTube exists.
Yeah, I don't always want to read through an article when I'm trying to find something new.
Absolutely.
So I'll watch, right? And kids can do that too when they're trying to gather information. So those are just some ways that I think it can be.
Yeah. And I know like sometimes, because my job now is to kind of help these facilitators at our school with ELA specifically. And so I'll try to get them some like literature that's multiple levels of the same topic. And it's easier to do with some topics than it is with others. Like if they're doing the third grade was doing an endangered animals project last year. It was very cool. And that one was easier. I was able to find multiple levels of books, like kindergarten level books about animals. And then I was able to find like more advanced books about animals, and then some more grade level books about animals. And then I was able to link them all in and say, like, here's some on YouTube or on Epic or whatever. Epic is a site where you can read for free during school hours, 8 to 3.
And many of them read to them.
Yeah. And so, right, because that audiobook option is really, really good.
Yeah.
And then for a lot of kids,
Yeah.
And even for me, like if I'm passively doing something to listen to an audiobook, I really like that, or podcast,
Yeah.
check that out.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And it's funny because when I had the conversation with Bree last Friday, she was talking about like her funny memory was she was subbing in a high school class, and the boys in her class were having to go to football during her class period, and she was teaching English, and she's like, I need them to read this book, but they're going to be gone so much to go to football practice
Yeah.
during my class. And then so she like talked to the coach and she set it up where she had them listening to like Romeo and Juliet like while they were doing their practice, because like she's like, I just need them to get the information. And it helped so many of them because by the time they got to the assessment at the end, like they already knew like this is what I need to do. And I was
Yeah.
just like imagining a bunch of like high school football players like just rocking out to Romeo and Juliet, and I was like, that's pretty funny. So
Like
yeah, it
playing
makes
football and listening.
absolutely like this
Yeah.
is getting pumped,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah. So yeah, a couple of thoughts come to mind. Like I remember when we're planning the projects, especially in kindergarten, because they're so little and they're still working on their
Yeah.
fine motor skills and gross motor skills, and they're still developing these things.
Yeah.
You're talking about watching your daughter
Oh, yeah.
grow and develop, and all of these things happen so quickly in these first 5 or 6 years, and you kind
Mhm.
of watch some of that happen during these kindergarten years too.
Yeah.
And so like we had to like pre-make some of the books for them, or
Mhm.
we would trace out some of the words in highlighter and have them like copy it down or whatever, but
Yeah.
they were still having these hands-on experiences, and we just really held their hands and held the reins tight. And then as they aged and became a little more mature and got used
Yeah.
to this whole project-based setup, then we kind of eased up
Yeah.
and then let them have a little bit more autonomy in what they were doing. But there was definitely a lot of hand holding.
Mhm.
And so if somebody's getting into project-based learning for the first time in fourth or fifth grade, their hand holding helps in the very beginning. Some sort of guideline does tend to help, especially for the teachers if they're new to it too.
And I think
So
that was one of my biggest lessons actually was, I thought going into it, and I don't know if you had this thought too, was it was just like, okay, we just pose this question and these kids are just gonna be self-guided. They're gonna
yeah,
research, they're gonna find information without any scaffolding along the way or any support or along the
right.
way, which is not the case. And even
No.
kids that have been doing it, right? So I actually have this book anyway, it's for middle schoolers, it's sitting on my desk, but it goes through and I'm like, wow, where was this when I started? Like a lesson, like you're gonna have to give them some support, some information. Here's your goal for
Right.
today. Here's your your benchmark. You want to get this milestone done by the end of the week. Here's some vocabulary words you might not know. Like there are all these pieces along the way, and especially kids who have never done it. Like, okay, here, maybe research these questions first. And then some kids they will fly, they will learn these new things, they'll go off. But that is a skill, right? Even as we explore and investigate our own interests that we want, like that, it is something you have to kind of learn how to research, how to gather information, how do I capture my thoughts, right? We're not just like, oh yeah, I can do this, and expecting us. So that was one of my first lessons I actually learned, because I really kind of just thought, okay, so we give them this question and they
Yeah.
just they'll go with it. Not the case though, and not for me
No,
that
because
have
you
done
would
it
need
for
to
a long
be
time.
naturally intrinsically motivated in that topic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
most people are not naturally intrinsically motivated in every single topic that comes up to
Yeah.
them. So you have to kind of get them excited about it. And
Yeah.
that was one of the things, like an entry event where you're like,
Yeah.
guess what? We're going to be doing blah, blah, blah. And you might do something fun or exciting or whatever
Yeah.
to build that interest. And then building that background knowledge is a big deal. What book
Yeah.
is it?
Oh, it's just the project-based learning handbook.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
yeah.
Show it.
Well, I have my blur background on.
That's
So.
okay. Oh,
Oh
project-based
yeah.
learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
there's one for
Purple and
elementary.
white.
Yeah, yeah. This one's for middle and high school, but it is helpful. It
Well, and
like
it's
goes
good to
through
know that
like
you
a
can take this
typical
all the
day.
way through middle school and high school
Yeah.
too. So that's like,
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and even along, I was actually thinking, when you're talking about Epic, because I did work with a facilitator at one of our middle school in Colorado, and we built, so the kids were investigating like different ancient civilizations. But he was finding like, well, I have a hard time with, I need like to give them a list of sites. And I think that is a great idea. I think it can really help, like we were talking about different resources. So we did like a choice board where they would click on either an article or a YouTube video, or so they're also learning how to take in information from well, not only different sites, but different in different ways and different, maybe it is a video, maybe it is just an article, maybe it's somebody, speaking about something. So I think those things have been lessons I've certainly learned along the way of how to organize it for the kids. So again, goes back to it might be this extra, prep and stuff, but once they're in it and they have all their resources, they can it can kind of go smoothly from there. So yeah, I was just thinking about that. And we used Epic a lot for that too.
Yeah,
Because
such a helpful
there's
resource.
such a range too.
And
like
I know that there's a lot more out there. Like I've seen sites, like I know during the pandemic, I found some like digital libraries that you can go to and download PDFs or something like that too. Like if you
yeah,
just had a hard time getting something, even if
yeah.
you're just looking at excerpts or something,
Oh yeah, yeah,
the internet's a
yeah,
great place. But it leads me to my next question. This is
yeah.
a new thought that I'm having as
Oh
we're talking. So I don't know what
yeah.
your thoughts on this are,
Okay, yeah.
but with the onset of more artificial intelligence coming onto the scene, you have things like Chat GPT and the like. I'm wondering how project-based learning and the thought processes behind project-based learning can help um how does that work with AI? I wonder. Like I I
Yeah.
want to clarify because I have skepticism. Like I know AI can be helpful, but the skeptical part of me is like, oh no, we're getting dumber as a society. Like all they have to do is put in a prompt and then it'll write a paper for them. Like they'll never learn how to write a paper, like things like that.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's completely true because I've seen different teachers do different things with it, and I'm very invested in their feedback of what they're getting with their students, and I think that it's really interesting, and that's a whole different conversation to have on a different day. But I'm wondering if project-based learning can kind of help to remediate, I don't know if that's the right word, but like um that you can still inspire those thought processes that you want your kids to have, and then maybe utilize it as a tool instead of just leaning on it to do the whole job for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Have
leaning
you
on the
Yeah, because I
AI.
don't think it's going away, so I don't know how
Yeah,
much it's worth fighting,
I know.
but I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on it? You might completely
Yeah.
disagree with me, and that's totally
No,
fine.
so no, no,
So
no. It's so funny because I'm like, so part of me, okay, so I have used it for when have been working on some projects with trying to kind of like type up some like a course description or a blurb, or hey, we're putting this proposal together or whatever it is, and
Mhm.
we'll go on there and be like, okay, here's our keywords, and it puts together this beautiful thing. And it's like, wow, I just saved so much time. So from my from my own standpoint, it's like, oh, it's super handy and helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like we're doing these anyway, my colleague and I are putting together some videos, and it'll like write the script um for us basically with our keywords, which yeah, okay, super helpful. But there is too part of me where I kind of fight this all the time, where I'm like, I totally believe, technology, like what we're doing right now is so amazing. Like we can have a conversation together and we live so far away,
Yeah.
But I also sometimes I'm like, how much are we like, how much time do we spend on it? How much, so I always have these battles anyway. So now we have this other thing we're adding to it.
Yeah.
And like VR too. I think there's so many
Yeah.
cool components of like virtual reality, but also like, okay, I don't want our whole world to be anyway. So I don't know, I'm probably kind of where you're at too, like how can we use it? And because too, so I'm right now working with some high school aged kids, and I'm reading through their work and I'm like, I don't think you wrote that.
So you made that by yourself, huh? Like
Yeah, because I've read some other questions and they sounded a little different. And I'm no rookie to this. I know how beautifully Chat GPT can write. So it's like, well, do I say, hey, you used your resources, or do I say, hey, like you should be doing this? Because right, I'm kind of on this like line of, yeah, as a society, I personally feel like my spelling is worse now than it was in the past, because I don't like
Because of autocorrect.
autocorrect, right? Like I'll
Yeah.
be like, how do you spell that? Sometimes I don't know if you ever maybe
Yeah.
that's just a me thing. Or like writing, like I don't always write pen and paper.
Yeah.
Things like that we're getting away from. I guess occasionally I do. So I'm like, yeah, I guess it's that like question, like, are we advancing or are we going the other way? So yeah, I'm not sure how in project-based learning, that is a great question.
Yeah, it's
Like,
something I
could we
just thought
use
about because I'm
it
like,
or
maybe that's
could
a way that you can still teach these like critical thinking skills and how, like, this is me being optimistic, by the way.
yeah, yeah,
Still teach those critical thinking
yeah,
skills and learn how to lean on those tools and resources for certain parts of it. But this way I can see that your gears are still turning and that you're not just typing up 2 sentences or a paragraph to get a whole beautiful thing, that you can
yeah,
put some thought into whatever it is that we're
yeah,
doing, you know? So
yeah,
maybe it's in my mind, I'm like, oh, maybe that's one of the solutions to try to like have a middle ground. And like, how do you bring that in?
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Because I mean, you can tell it, write me an essay on whatever topic, and I'm pretty sure it will. I haven't tried that on it, but so maybe, or if what we're asking the kids to do in project-based learning is different, how can they use it, or is there something more we're asking them to do that maybe can't be done on there? I don't know what the answer is with that one.
I know.
So I
Super
do see the
interesting.
pros, I do, but I do also see where it's like, oh,
And I'm
how
also
much?
not trying to sound super antiquated because I imagine every time a
Yeah.
new technology came out, like there's a
Yeah.
slightly older generation that's going, well, wait, hold on. You know,
Yeah.
now they're not going to know how to address a letter because
Yeah.
email is out. And then you're like,
Yeah.
but then why would they need to address a letter?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and then, but you do a little bit here
Yeah.
and there, you know,
Yeah.
but not nearly as much as you might have used to like 30 years ago, you know?
True.
So I'm
Yeah.
trying to not sound like that person either, but I am a little
Yeah.
bit for a developing mind.
Right.
You're a
Yeah.
professional in the field. We know you know how to critically think.
Yeah.
So when you're using it as a tool, we know you're using it as a tool, and that's
That's true.
okay.
Yeah.
But like if you're 12, you know, I want to know that you know how to form
Yeah.
thoughts on your own. But then are you going to need to? I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
is this chat just gonna form all your, is it gonna write emails for you and do so? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, I mean, yeah, and I don't want to sound like that either, but there is a part of me that still thinks there is some goodness in some of the basics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're reaching our hour mark. I want to ask you, do you have a fond memory or a memory that brings you joy or makes you laugh from teaching? Just try to think of one that you look on and you're like, that was funny, or whatever it was.
Okay, so the first thing that came to mind, because it's a shared memory. So Taleen, we're both like right tall. We both have long hair. So the kids always think like, oh, are you guys sisters? Are you guys related? Right? I don't know if I
Yeah.
a good one, but it makes me chuckle. So I have a tattoo. And I don't even remember who said it, but anyway, it's on my lower back area, and anyway, there's words. But one of the kids asked me from my first year teaching, "Do you have Mrs. Stevens' name tattooed on your back?" Still to this day, whenever I think about that, I think it is the funniest story. And I don't even remember, like, I should have just been like, yeah, like, of course I do.
I love her so much. Just met. Put it on her back.
But I love it because I think the kids, like, that's like, to them, right, like just how they see things, right, like, oh, you guys must be sisters. Well, you must have her
Yeah.
name tattooed
So funny.
on your back. So
So,
that was
so funny.
just questions like that. I think that's one of my fondest memories, are things you get all the time, especially with like 9 and 10-year-olds.
They're so fun. I was thinking about you the other day and that first year of teaching. I actually reference it a lot when I'm working with the new teachers at our school, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. I mean, you understand some of it, but you don't completely understand.
Yeah.
And and so we were talking about how open you can be with your students and stuff, and like how
Yeah.
they're so interested in your life sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So like my students were always concerned about whether I was married, had
Yes.
kids, but had dogs, cats, whatever, like,
Yeah.
and they would ask me all these questions, and I'm more or less an open book. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, and at the time I'm like, yeah, I am married. I'm still married. And then, but I didn't have any kids, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And then,
Yeah.
and then I remember in that class that same year, there were kids asking you if you were married, and you weren't married at the time.
Yeah.
And and they they planned your wedding. They like did all this stuff. So I was telling some of our teachers about it too, because I was like, they just love you sometimes, and they just
Yeah.
want to know more about you. And this is kind of how you make breakthroughs with some of your kids
Mhm.
sometimes. It's just getting to know them. And I'm
Yeah.
like, could turn that into a project. Like, what does Miss Kendra's wedding look like?
So
So
funny because that was my other memory that I remember because yeah, they like drew my dress. They drew, and it is so funny to me too because my husband, who I am married to now, was, I mean, yeah, he was like our aide at the
yeah.
time in the class. And they would be like, "Oh, what about Mr. E?" And I'm like, "Oh, you guys are
It was like the
ridiculous."
logical, and that I told
Yeah.
them that too. I was like, her now husband was our aide, so they were like planning their wedding, and little
Yeah.
did they know that they were actually going to
Actually
get married.
planning. Yeah. Part of
So
me
now they have a
wanted
baby.
to invite those kids, like, you guys got to come to the
Yeah.
wedding because we planned it. I mean,
I mean, the
yeah, and they
dress is
would
a
tell,
little different. The location
yeah, it
is
was.
somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. They would tell me like, "Oh, well, you need to go to Starbucks at lunch." I'm like, "Why?" "Well, that's where you're going to meet your husband." I'm like, "Oh, really? Is that not the place?" Okay.
They're like planning your little meet cute in your own rom-com
Yeah.
life. Like,
Yeah, but that really is, and I think that's how we connect with them, right? They want to know who you are as a person. They want to know all of that. So it is that was my other one. I couldn't pick between the two, either a
yeah.
tattoo of Mrs. Stevens or planning my wedding. Who it did work out. They did a good job planning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just brought project based into your life, and then they
Yeah.
created all of these things. That's so funny.
Oh, it's so funny.
Well, Kendra, thank you so much for spending time with me. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. And I
Yeah.
and I just adore you, and I love you as an educator, and any kid who comes across your path is lucky to have you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
that's so awesome.
Oh.
And I'm glad we're friends.
I
So
know. I love you. I miss you. And
I
yeah,
love
thank
you
you so
too.
much. This was so fun to just talk with you about. I mean, we talk about this stuff anyway, but I'm
Yeah.
happy that the message is hopefully getting out and supporting people who are interested in all different forms of education.
Yeah, I hope so. Like that is my hope.